Your free will, meaning your own desire, may not actually be in your hands. According to the latest scientific discovery, if I take this phone in my hands, it may seem to you that I have taken this phone by my own will, but perhaps this desire, this intention, this free will is just an illusion, and the real free will is not in our hands at all. It means I didn't take this in my own will. This is what the latest scientific discovery is claiming. It's mind-boggling, right? But you know scientists don't shoot arrows in the air without any evidence, without proof. So, on what basis are they making such big claims? Recently, some experiments have undoubtedly revealed mind-bending discoveries. Whenever we consciously take an action, like the example I gave of picking up a mobile phone, the very first thought that certainly comes to our mind about performing that action is already decided by our brain, at least half a second before. In simple terms, when you consciously make a decision, your mind has already subconsciously made that decision at least half a second to 5 seconds beforehand. The decision has already been made for you, and the experience of free will, where you think you are choosing from 100 different options to decide which action to take, is merely a formality. So, the main question here is that we are not actually controlling our own mind. Who is controlling the electrical firing happening in our minds? Well, the deeper question is, what exactly is consciousness, which gives us the feeling of free will? Is the human body just a biological machine? Right. So why are we able to feel alive, meaning we can sense our existence and this world, while other machines, like this phone, cannot? And what about plants or fish? Are they also conscious? Or microorganisms like bacteria and viruses, which don't even have a brain, can they also be called conscious? And do they have free will? Well, to answer all these questions, we need to understand at a fundamental, basic level what consciousness actually is in the first place, because there are many misconceptions and superstitious concepts surrounding it. Is this consciousness a metaphysical or spiritual thing that we cannot see or measure? Or is it a physical quantity that can be pinpointed or measured? Interesting question, right? I'm sure this question has crossed your mind at some point. So, our story of exploration begins 2 decades ago when 2 world-famous neuroscientists, Christoph Koch and Tononi, were trying to understand consciousness at a deeper level. They basically wanted to understand how consciousness is created in the brain. From their perspective, since consciousness is a sensation that is somehow created in the body, we should be able to measure that quantity in some way. For this reason, they started using various brain scanning equipment like fMRI PET scans to measure brain activities. To explain consciousness, they developed a theory called integrated information theory, which made some very strange predictions that they wanted to test through experiments. According to this theory, the total amount of information processed in the brain from our sensory organs should initially be greater than the total input information received. If it is greater, then this extra information that is added during processing is what gives rise to our thoughts, ideas, intuitions, and abstract aspects, which we refer to as a conscious experience or consciousness. So, did the scans show the same patterns they predicted? Well, absolutely, they were correct. They managed to measure consciousness in a way, but this was just the beginning of a very interesting exploration. They observed that whenever they gave participants certain tasks, the amount of information being input into their brains was generating more information than the total amount. When they looked at which parts of the brain were most active, they found that 4 major areas were involved: the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical thinking and future visualization; the striatum, which learns from past rewards and punishments, and the parietal cortex and thalamus, which combine information from sensory organs and the body's own position to make sense of it all. They observed that extra information was being generated in these four areas, indicating that the complex interplay of these regions gives rise to consciousness and its various aspects. However, we cannot fully explain consciousness solely through the electrical activity occurring in the brain. I mean, take the example of a phone or computer. There is also electrical activity and information transfer happening between different hardware components. But we don't say that the computer is conscious. For example, let's do a small experiment. Keep your eyes on the screen and see what is written there. Now observe it for about 12 seconds and tell me what picture forms in your mind. It must have created some kind of picture. Right. But I only wrote the word octopus. Right. So how did this idea of an octopus form in your mind? Clearly, the octopus is not physically present in your mind. Right. And it wasn't even on the screen. The screen only had the written word. How did this fictional idea take birth in your mind? And this fictional idea then created a subjective experience in your mind. Now let's conduct another experiment in the same way. This time, close your eyes and imagine the color red. Are you able to visualize the color red in your mind? Even with everything appearing black, you should be able to create the idea of the red color in your mind. Now the entire experience is happening only in the mind. It does not exist in physical reality. So this subjective experience is indeed what consciousness is. It refers to the sensations happening in one's body, or the perception of something visible outside. The idea that electrical activities are generating consciousness in our brain rather than those electrical activities themselves clearly indicates that the integrated information theory, which is one of the leading scientific theories on consciousness, unfortunately, does not fully define consciousness. Consciousness is not only information or electrical activity inside the brain, it is a complete experience that includes sensations in one's body and perceptions of the external world, which makes a being conscious. Now there is a quite interesting experiment that will give you an idea of the strangeness of consciousness. But friends, before we get into that experiment, today we are trying to understand consciousness. And in all these experiments and observations, data plays a very big role. Data is the true currency today, which all scientific innovations and managerial decisions are made. I was going to tell you about an experiment that would give you an idea of the peculiarity of consciousness. In this, an experimental setup first places a rubber hand in front of your eyes, then hides your real hand with a cloth and cardboard. Then it stimulates your hidden hand and the rubber hand together so that your brain starts to recognize the artificial hand as a part of its own body. Yes, feel this. And then, as soon as the connection is established, it does this with you. You are good. Don't worry. Have you seen how literally crazy it is the way our brain gives us a false pen, a false reality? The pain is not in our body, it is just in our mind. Once again, consciousness is more like an idea and an operating system inside the brain that has been created due to the hardware of your brain. Now, you know about me. We are never satisfied with not knowing the answers, and we can't sleep at night. That's why we dive as deep as we can in search of the truth. And then a question came to my mind. If we really want to fundamentally understand consciousness, we first need to understand where and why consciousness originated in the first place. Clearly, if you look around the world, every organism possesses some characteristic that gives it some form of survival advantage. This is why it evolved and never went extinct. This is known as the law of natural selection. So, consciousness must have provided some advantage to some organism over those organisms that do not have consciousness, meaning non-conscious life could only transform into conscious life when it began to gain a survival advantage from being conscious. If we can solve this puzzle, we will fundamentally understand why consciousness was born, and we will be able to grasp what this mysterious and unique thing called consciousness really is. Can science explain it, or can we only understand it through spirituality? And even whether only we have consciousness, or if it exists in microorganisms as well. Ultimately, do conscious beings like us really have free will, or is free will merely a basic illusion? Most scientists agree that the birth of consciousness happened due to a basic need. An animal needed to direct itself towards food, meaning it had to be able to go to food and consume it. If you are a basic organism like bacteria, you cannot consciously direct your motion or direction based on the expectation of food. And if we look at it, they actually do not need this at all, because due to their extremely high numbers and their random behavior, they easily find food and have been surviving and reproducing for millions of years, which is ultimately the goal of any living organism, according to biology, to survive and make copies of themselves. Now, to survive, it is essential for them to have the ability to identify positive and damaging interactions occurring in their surrounding environment. For example, if they encounter a chemical that is harmful to the cell, it can be destructive and may lead to the cell's demise. Conversely, if there is a food source that can be a positive interaction, and they should interact with that food source. This is where the evolution of consciousness began, at a very basic level, initially resembling a specific reflex action. This means that as soon as simple animals receive an environmental trigger, a response behavior is created, which gradually began to coordinate depending on the outcome. This led to the development of cells that would react by repeating a particular behavior in response to positive triggers and would give a different reaction to avoid negative triggers. For example, consider one of the simplest animal cells, Trichoplax adherens, which slows down when it approaches food and starts moving rapidly when food is not available. We can call this level 1 of consciousness. However, as animals became more complex, such as fish and reptiles, they needed to actively seek out their food and escape from predators. In such cases, clearly, reflex actions alone were not sufficient. There was a need for information storage so that these organisms could remember and estimate which behaviors would be rewarding and which would be punishing. This information storage began to manifest as a feeling or sensation, allowing the organisms to preemptively feel whether they should engage in a particular behavior or not. For instance, a fish feels a sensation of fear when it sees a larger fish and avoids going in that direction, while it feels a positive sensation when it sees food. In level 1 consciousness, as we have learned, there is no sensation or experience, meaning that consciousness as we know it today was not present. However, in level 2, this experience began to develop at a very basic stage. Even aquatic organisms or reptiles were not able to experience the world in the same way that mammals and even birds do today. You see, just a little over 200 million years ago, a significant milestone occurred in the evolution of consciousness, so substantial that within just a few hundred or thousand years, organisms began to develop that were quite advanced in consciousness. There were two very important reasons behind this. As soon as life emerged from the ocean, warm-blooded animals began to appear. Now, where cold-blooded animals like crocodiles or fish are totally dependent on their environment and its temperature, they had no need for it. Understanding oneself as a separate entity is a very important aspect of consciousness. The other name for the evolution of consciousness is I. I am the one who is able to feel this world and feel myself. As soon as warm-blooded animals appeared, they began to create their own moving environment. No matter what the temperature is outside, unlike cold-blooded animals, which will cool down and become sluggish if it is cold outside, these warm-blooded animals will maintain their body temperature between 37 and 30 degrees Celsius, even if the outside temperature is 20 degrees. This change has helped them develop more individuality and a sense of self compared to other animals, allowing them to differentiate their bodies from their environment. As soon as the body temperature of warm-blooded animals increased, the transfer speed of new cells and neurons increased at least 3 times. This led to the creation of faster feedback loops in the brain's neurons, which began processing data received from all sensory organs, quickly to create that unique sensory experience we now call consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is not just about information processing in the brain for us. It is a complete mental experience that our biology is currently able to support. Due to our millions of years of evolution, these bacteria and plants are also conscious. But their consciousness is very different from our consciousness. Their consciousness does not encompass the colorful experiences, sensations, and meanings that exist in more complicated life forms. And they may not even require consciousness at our level. As the brain and neural circuitry of a living being become more complicated for its survival, the awareness of that being's consciousness, experiences, meanings, sensations, and perceptions also become deeper and richer. Consciousness is a mathematical value of the collective data stored by neurons and external sensory input, which provides a richer experience. The more complicated it becomes. From a mathematical perspective, complexity leads to dynamic and chaotic systems that function as mathematical attractors, meaning they constantly create dynamic values based on sensory input, which we experience as dynamic, experience and refer to as consciousness. Now remember that the birth of consciousness was, as you might already know, a significant well in the first place, allowing the body to proactively connect to its energy source in a proactive manner. This is why, even after many millions of years of neurological evolution, we feel free will in our daily lives. We feel like we are the masters of our own desires, consciously choosing to perform any particular action wherever we wish, directing ourselves as we choose at any given moment. It feels that way, right? But here comes a truly heartbreaking observation, a brain experiment that has been repeated by various researchers, yet the results always indicate that we have consciousness, but perhaps not the free will we believe we possess. Absolutely shocking, right? In this experiment, what did they discover? Well, in the 1980s, Benjamin Libet, in their groundbreaking study, placed electrodes on the heads of some participants to measure their brain activities. These participants had to randomly wave their hands whenever they felt like it. During this time, Libet noted a particularly interesting observation in a detailed manner. Whenever a participant consciously waved their hand, the EEG machine captured brain activity about approximately half a second before. This means that the unconscious parts of the brain light up beforehand, and only half a second later do the conscious parts become aware. And even then, the person only realizes that they made the decision to perform that action. In a fascinating way, unconscious activities are giving birth to conscious activities. We do not consciously make decisions as we feel we do. Rather, our unconscious brain processes play a major role in dictating what the action will be. This was absolutely mind-blowing. Libet himself, in his groundbreaking research, could hardly believe it. He thought that perhaps our unconscious mind definitely influences actions to a great extent, creating a very strong impulse. But our conscious mind has the ultimate power to accept or reject that action with significant willpower. For example, if your unconscious mind creates a very strong impulse to open a door, your conscious brain can reject that impulse with significant willpower. The ultimate and final authority lies with your conscious brain in our conscious brain. This explanation is convenient because it reinstates our belief in free will. Is the matter really that simple? I mean, going a little deeper reveals a completely new world that is even more fundamental than the world of neurons. I am talking about the world of quantum mechanics, from which the biology of neurons and the brain emerges, leading to our consciousness and psychology. Let's understand what quantum mechanics and the quantum interactions happening in our minds reveal, as this is the most fundamental reality of our world. Let's explore whether we truly have free will at the quantum level or not. About 100 years ago, one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, Sir Roger Penrose, presented the physics behind consciousness in his book, The Emperor's New Mind. Interestingly, this is even more intriguing than biology, and recently we have received several mind-blowing experimental proofs. In fact, Penrose made a quite simple yet interesting argument regarding the physics of consciousness in his book. He stated that all those things in the universe that we do not even know exist and have not been mathematically proven are things that brilliant physicists like Einstein can imagine beforehand. Our brains, which process signals, do not simply pass through a set algorithm like a computer. Rather, these pathways or circuits were formed due to our evolutionary past. There must definitely be some randomness involved in our brain circuits, and quantum mechanics should play a role in this. Now see, this statement coming from a physicist was quite bold because they had no evidence to prove it, and it could easily be labeled as a homonym fallacy, which basically means that just because we have no other explanation for the randomness of consciousness, we directly associate it with the randomness of quantum mechanics, which does not make it a fact. We need evidence to justify this claim. Due to the lack of evidence, this idea was buried for some time. However, a miraculous collaboration occurred in the 1900s when N.S. Theodosius Hameroff observed something fascinating. Throughout his career, he learned that all anesthetics, the drugs that induce unconsciousness, interfere with some chemical in your brain, and it is precisely for this reason that a person becomes unconscious. But then he noticed that noble gas, which is an inert gas, meaning it is extremely unreactive and does not react with anything. This gas can also partially anesthetize humans, and nobody knew how this was happening until it was discovered that the gas was somehow affecting a special structure inside our neurons that forms and disintegrates randomly. This random structure is called microtubules. For those who don't know, these microtubules are quite special. They act like zip lines inside your cells, moving proteins, chemicals, and organelles from one place to another. This means that the signaling chemicals traveling between neurons also travel with their help. Their formation and disintegration are completely random, but is there a cause behind this randomness, or is it truly an actual randomness related to quantum mechanics? True randomness occurs without any cause. By the way, if you didn't know, quantum objects, according to the latest scientific evidence, are proven to behave in a truly random manner without any underlying cause. But do these microtubules forming in our brains, which shape our thoughts, actually exhibit quantum properties? We will need evidence for that, right? Evidence that we didn't have until now, but surprisingly, it has just come out. A paper was published this year, 2024, which experimentally observed quantum properties in microtubules. Basically, in quantum mechanics, there is a phenomenon called quantum entanglement, where extremely small particles like electrons, protons, and photons can become so connected that if you separate them by a billion light years, an interaction with one particle influences the other as if they are connected by an invisible thread. This phenomenon of quantum entanglement can be experimentally observed. In fact, whenever you shine light on a glowing object, its electrons individually absorb the photons of that light. They become excited with that extra energy for a while and then release that energy back as glow after some time, ultimately returning to their original state. In normal objects, when this phenomenon is observed, the glow fades quite slowly in the absence of the light source, and overall, the brightness of that glow is significantly reduced. On the other hand, if some electrons become entangled with each other, it has been observed that they all behave together like a single electron. In the absence of certain conditions, light sources emit a lot of light, which is why they quickly lose their glow. This quantum phenomenon is called superradiance. If you observe superradiance in a microscopic entity, you can understand that quantum mechanics is operating at a fundamental level within it, as this is fundamentally a quantum property. But has superradiance been observed by scientists somewhere in our brains? Has there been a yes? But guess where you might have seen the well-known zipline of microtubules. We were talking about how small tubulin proteins are formed randomly on the spot. Inside them, there is one amino acid called tryptophan, or simply one chemical. Its electrons show superradiance, and therefore quantum entanglement is observed, and it is only observed when these tryptophan molecules are part of microtubules. Superradiance has not been observed in individual tryptophan molecules, as suggested by Roger Penrose. 100 years ago, not all thoughts that arise in our minds are produced solely due to programmed circuits. Instead, quantum mechanics also plays a role behind them. That is, the free will that we understand as something we individually create. It turns out that there is a significant role of randomness in it as per one's will. And as we learned earlier, there are also drawbacks of this new research concerning all parts of our consciousness and unconsciousness in the brain. This new observation is such that other scientists have not yet repeated it. We will need further confirmation from more experiments to understand this as a solid case. We also need to test more quantum properties in microtubules so that we can be sure that there are indeed quantum properties in this structure. And this superradiance was not just a fluke. So at this point, we can definitely say that this is a very good start for understanding quantum consciousness. And I know that after hearing all this, you might feel like I'm just telling a fairy tale, yet I'm saying that it's a good start. Even after hearing so much, it feels like we know so little. Well, this is the beauty and humility of science. Science never tires and never stops asking questions. We've advanced in understanding consciousness. We know consciousness isn't singular. The consciousness of a bacteria is different. That of a plant is different. That of a fish is different. That of a dog is different. And that of a bird is different. Even in our own brain, there is not just one consciousness, but multiple modules that independently give rise to different types of consciousness. For example, the right hemisphere of the brain can only visually process an object and is optimized for vision, but if it is not connected to the left hemisphere, it cannot use the verbal and intellectual module of the left hemisphere. When shown something, it will never be able to accurately say what it has seen, because the verbal module is not functioning. However, when shown an image of the same object, it will definitely recognize it. This has been observed in patients whose corpus callosum, the part that connects the left and right hemispheres, has been severed. Essentially, different parts of our brain create different types of consciousness. which together project a final consciousness that gives us the experience of I being separate from the world and interacting with it. Through this sense of I, we experience the universe with our unique individuality. Here comes a fascinating truth. In a way, if we do not have free will, we also have a kind of free will. We must not forget that our brain is capable of neuroplasticity, meaning our subconscious does influence our brain, as seen in experiments. However, our experiences, our learnings, and our external environment create new neuroplastic changes in our brain, which then form the basis of our unconscious and subconscious. This is scientifically proven, meaning our unconscious can influence our consciousness, and we can influence our unconscious and subconscious through sheer willpower, better choices in life, and better knowledge.
It is fascinating in the way that we both have and do not have free will. No matter how you look at it, I believe 100% that I can gradually shape my important life goals consciously, both my conscious and unconscious mind. This power is in our hands, in our thoughts, and we just need to use science to educate ourselves, understand the fundamentals of our minds and this world, and align our lives accordingly. Ultimately, finding answers to the big questions of science and life, along with a fulfilling journey, can provide us with the knowledge that makes our lives better. In my opinion, there can be no better journey than this. So, I hope that after watching today's video, you have gained a scientific perspective on consciousness. Make sure to share this video consciously with your friends and family members so that we can all together enhance our communities' collective consciousness. See you very soon.